Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Engaging Transition-Age Youth in Employment and Education. This is the kickoff event for our new focus at the Institute on Transition-Age Youth. We're excited to be partnering with Thresholds out of Chicago, Illinois, and hope this is the first of many opportunities to provide education related to this topic. We have everyone muted, but the phone line will be open at the conclusion of the webinar for a short round of questions. Please make sure your computer is muted if you're listening on a phone line. If you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to enter a comment in the chat box and we will try to respond. Thank you again for your attendance, and I will now pass the camera on to our partners in Chicago.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Are we ready? We're ready. We're on. Okay. So we're each going to introduce ourselves. The title of our webinar today, let me move this towards me, is Engaging Transition-Age Youth in Employment and Education. And each of us has different expertise we bring to this topic, and we're incredibly excited to share in a very brief webinar some of our learnings, lessons learned here at Thresholds, and our expertise. Hold on one second. Here we go. So who are we? I'm going to pass this over to Mark Fagan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Fagan. I oversee the youth programs here at Thresholds. We'll talk a little bit about what those are in just a little bit. I've been here about a little over 11 years now.
Okay. Oh.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eshan Spencer, and I am the Program Director of Employment Services. I've been with Thresholds for about 8 years now. I initially started off as providing direct services where I was an employment specialist, and now I oversee 10 employment teams, which 2 of those teams are for young adults.
Yeah, and right now what you guys see on your screen is a quote from one of our young people. And we're going to play it for you in just a moment. Do you want to say anything else about the quote?
So this quote comes from a young adult who was a client in our young adult program. She participated in both supportive employment and supportive education. She graduated from college a year ago, and she is now a flight attendant. She's now a flight attendant, and here's the quote.
There's a lot of issues, a lot of things, a lot of quirks about myself that I could have worked out if I was a person. I think when you're in that particular setting, it's always like everyone's trying to tell you what to do, and you're just trying to trend. As an adult now who's so independent, I think that I wish I would have took the time to listen to my therapist, especially when it came to family issues, how to deal with family, or how to deal with conflict, or how to build healthy relationships and maintain them. As far as on the supportive employment part, is just, learning those skills that a lot of times your job coaches and the case managers who work with you and the type of learning skills. Like, I'm not trying to say that they're nagging because they're constantly on you about it, but I guarantee you when you look back on it, you will realize that they were trying to teach you something and you were just being too stubborn because it was coming from them to listen. And my best advice is to listen, to utilize every single relationship I have.
Okay. So we wanted to start this out with a quote because we believe in working with young people and having youth voice infused in everything, and what we do here at Thresholds is very important. One of my colleagues over here just reminded me I didn't introduce myself. My name is Vanessa Voorhees. I am a senior researcher here at Thresholds. I also have a lot of work history in adapting different models of practice, including supported employment for transition-age youth, and I partner with the University of Massachusetts Transitions Research and Training Center to really figure out how do we help young people reach their vocational goals, how do we engage them in services when we know young people are really challenging to engage in our adult mental health system. So with that being said, I think I'm doing a good job of passing this back over to Mark. Oh, and wait, quickly, let me talk about our plan for today. We are going to describe how we make working and going to school hip and cool for young people with serious mental health challenges in Chicago. So our context is different than a lot of places across the country, but I think we have a lot to offer in regards to what we've learned in implementing services here, and especially adapting adapting evidence-based practices from the adult system. We're going to talk a little bit about theory and best practices that inform specifically our approach to supporting the vocational development of transition-age youth. Okay, our context.
So I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about our services here at Thresholds to kind of build a little bit of context in terms of how we work with youth and young adults in the realm of supported employment and supported education and so forth. Even though we kind of have generally youth services, our real focus and our expertise is around young adults. And when we talk about young adults, we provide those services in a number of different settings, which we'll get into in a little bit. We really specify in utilizing an individual placement and support model of supported employment, and that's how we've sort of dovetailed the work that we do with our young people. We're settled in an urban area. Chicago, as you all know, obviously is very urban in that sort of setting, and our young people live in the community just in the same capacity as any other young people would, despite whether they're in residential type of services or transitional living, or if they're living on their own. So speaking of our age range, our general target age range is 16 to 26 years of age, depending on the program that our young people are associated with, that have the most serious levels of mental illness across the state. And so we'll have young people that might come from other parts of the state that will be a part of our programming and our services in one capacity or another. We have quite a number of young people that also are part of the child welfare system, and as a result have early and complex trauma that has then sort of snowballed into some other mental health challenges as they become older. And so that mix of trauma and mental illness really tends to be the sweet spot, so to speak, of who we work with on a day-to-day basis. Most of the young people also have quite a bit of delayed vocational development. You know, they typically have not had the same opportunities as others of their age group, where maybe they used to babysit as a young person, or did lawn mowing for money, eventually moved on to doing things like McDonald's or retail and so on and so forth. A lot of our young adults have gotten to be 19 years old or 20 years old without having any experience in jobs. And so that creates a little bit of a context of how we go about providing services. And, you know, as we talked about before, the majority of our young people have had some sort of system involvement, whether that's in the child welfare system or juvenile justice or in the mental health system. Most of those young people have had some level of system involvement before we started to work with them. Just really briefly in terms of our array of programs, we have a whole host of programs that are more residential in nature. And as we said before, we're very community oriented. So even though you may think of a residential type program that might be out in the country that, you know, is as far off from the city as possible, that's not necessarily our setting. The residentials that we run is very community based, and so as a result, the places where our young people live are very similar to where they might live if they weren't a part of our residential program. So it looks like 3 flats and other kinds of structures along those lines. So our young adult program consists of that residential type of atmosphere. We also have what we would call transitional living programs, where young people live in their own apartments with staff support. One of our transitional living programs is also the Mothers Project, which is a program specifically for teen moms and their children to get services from us in that capacity. Through those programs, we provide a whole host of therapy, case coordination, transition services, and of course supported employment, supported education, and other things along those lines. Our Emerge program is an intensive outreach program where young people get services in their own homes or in the community. Some of our young people are homeless as well that we provide services for. And this is sort of a program without walls. And the RISE program is also a program for youth that are experiencing homelessness and providing some homeless-based services for them. Within the Mothers Project, we also have a small early learning center, and then our Thresholds High School is also for young people to go to high school, get their high school diploma, and it's really kind of uniquely fit for those with serious mental health challenges. The other thing to kind of note is that all of our programs are really kind of situated in a way where we help young people sort of develop their own ownership over their treatment, over their services, and over their trajectory. And so for those of you guys that are familiar with the transition to independence process, we're very fully immersed in the principles that align with the TIP model. Okay, so quickly, some of the key components that both stem from the work that we do along the lines of the TIP model, as well as some of the supported employment principles that we look at. You know, we really focus a lot on helping young people in doing things with them and facilitating their progress rather than doing things for our young people. And they're very used to growing up in the multiple systems they've been involved with where people have done things for them, where they haven't had a lot of choice about where they live or where they go or whether they're able to get a job or not. And some of them have had family members that have also taken more control for them than maybe they would normally have as a young adult. And so as a result, our job is to really kind of help balance both the situations that they've come from with the situations that they're going to be going to as an adult, and really using this young adult time to kind of help them balance both taking more ownership over them and getting more involved in their treatment planning. And so when we talk about treatment, we're not just talking about therapy and case management and things like that. We're talking about the whole person and really getting into all those areas of transition and functioning, including physical health and wellness, and including employment and education, living situation, and things along those lines. This includes establishing, but also with other people that the young person really defines as their family. And so what that means is that their kind of position in the family relationship. For them, as you all know, their family may not necessarily be defined as mom or dad, and sometimes not even as brother and sister, but some of the closest people in their lives that are going to help them kind of transition into adulthood might be somebody in a faith-based organization. It might be a cousin. It might be a teacher. And so how do we help young people sort of develop those relationships more to help them get ahead in some of their transition goals? And in doing so, we're really building that level of empowerment where our young people have where the young people are able to gain their highest level of self-sufficiency and gain that social capital as they're moving into their adult life. Okay, so I'm going to pass this over to Ishan, and she's going to talk a little bit about our supported employment and IPS.
So IPS, Individual Placement and Supportive Employment, is an evidence-based approach to supportive employment. It's often used interchangeable and confused with shelter employment and place and train program. But IPS is a competitive employment in the community where our youth are able to work alongside with people without disability. And it focuses on their preferences. IPS was first studied in a randomized control trial in 1996, and between 1996 and 2011, there were an additional 15 randomized trials. This is what made it an evidence-based practice. Thresholds in 2003 implemented IPS, and in 2006, we became the Learning Institute for IPS. Since then, we have provided technical assistance to agencies citywide and nationally. Our employment specialists have spoken at many conferences about IPS and supportive education. In 2009, we received the NAMI Heroes at the Fight Award, and in 2013, we received the National Council Award for our IPS program.
Yay!
Recently, we were awarded the SAMHSA Transformation Grant, and also we were awarded the BIP grant, which was provided by our VR system here in Illinois, Department of Rehabilitative Services. So why IPS, and why is it so unique? Because of these 8 great principles. 0 exclusion. What that means is that if the youth state that they want to work, then they get to work. There is no criteria to receiving the services. All they have to do is work. Focus on competitive employment. We only look for jobs that's going to at least give them minimum wage, and if benefits is allowed, then they'll have benefits as well. Integration of mental health services. One thing we always tell people is that employment is everyone's business. So we want to make sure that the employment staff is part of the mental health treatment team, and that they're meeting and talking to the clinical staff as well. Preferences of our youth are considered. If our youth state that they want to work at McDonald's or overnight, if they only want to work a mile away from their school, we make sure that we advocate for that with the employers. Personalized benefits counseling. Many of our youth do receive benefits payments. So we want to make sure that we educate them around their benefits to let them know that it is always better to work and receive benefits than to just receive benefits alone. The next principle is rapid job search, which means that our youth do not have to take any assessments. They don't have to complete any training. They don't have to do anything. We begin working with them immediately, and within 30 days, we're out in the community, start talking to employers about our youth. Systematic job development. Systematic job development is when our employment specialists actually go and talk to the employers on behalf of our clients and tell them about IPS and try to get them interviews and hire at these places that they're looking for. Time-limited and individualized supports, which means as long as the youth stated they want to work, and as long as they're keeping their job, we will continue to provide support. So if they're at the job for 2 years, we will provide support for 2 years. And now,
All right. Okay.
Hope you guys are enjoying this framing we're doing with the computer. It's really sophisticated. Worked really hard at that. So it sounds great, right? Working IPS and doing it with young adults sounds like a fantastic way to go about doing things. What we found is that it's been a very significantly helpful match, right? Where, we provide services with IPS for young adults, and we do that within the context of all of our tip-informed services. And so we have supported employment staff that are nestled into every team, regardless of which program that we have. So, if we are running a residential program, we have our supported employment folks that are deeply involved with the other staff that work with them. If it's an intensive outreach program, they're part of that intensive outreach team and are sort of nestled within the context of that team. So we found that to be a really good match, and there's a lot of principles that are very similar to our tip-informed services as it is to IPS. And that would include the essence of coaching, that we're not doing things for them, that instead we're coaching young people along and helping them build their own self-sufficiency. That's really community-based. That's about getting out of our offices and working in the community, helping do job searches according to what young people are interested in working on. That it's building a futures focus. It's helping young people see ahead and taking the idea of what do you want to be, what do you want to do as you move forward? What would life look like for you 10 years from now? And what's something that we could do today to even get going on that? And it's also a place and train model. So we have young people learning while doing. That it's more about kind of doing in the community and doing while you're learning on the job, rather than having to go through a whole bunch of different steps before being able to apply for a real job. And then, of course, about the youth choice, that we aren't saying, well, we have a contract with the local grocery store and the local movie theater, and so as a result, those are the places where we can help you get a job. Instead, we do job development based on what a young person is most interested in working, in where a young person might be most interested in working. So let's say that they are interested in working at a pet store, but we have no relationship there. Our job is to be doing some job development with those kinds of locations as a young person might be applying for that job. So everything seems great, and so it created a really strong relationship for us, and it seemed like kind of a perfect match. But as we know, there always gets to be tensions in those relationships. And in the same way, there are tensions between providing services along the lines of IPS with young adults. And as Ishan talked about, IPS is an evidence-based practice for adults, and it's been studied for adults originally. Part of our job has been to try to figure out whether it works for young adults, and there's been a number of studies, well, not a whole lot, but a few studies that started to come along to do that sort of thing that Vanessa will refer to. And so as we started doing some of these practices and also studying them, as Vanessa will talk about, we found that there are some differences there. And so, one of those things that we take a look at is the notion of generalist versus specialist. And in a lot of the young adult-based work, especially that's done in the community, it would look like a team-based approach where you're working on all of a young person's transition domains. Yet we know that employment really takes a special kind of person to be able to focus deeply in that particular area. It's not exactly the same talent to have a case manager or a care coordinator be doing job development and job coaching the same way that somebody that has that expertise might. Another area that we found, especially for young adults, that's more so than older adults, is that vacillation between employment and education. And what we see is that young people tend to move between one or the other, and that really calls for higher levels of integration between supported employment and supported education than you may have in other venues. Another thing was around the idea of job starts versus job tenure, and if you kind of take into account the focus of young people that maybe haven't had a job up until this point, yet IPS is really built upon adults that might be in recovery that maybe had a life earlier on where they were working or dabbled in other forms of work. We're dealing with young adults that often have not had that experience. So even just starting jobs is something that's important for them, and that allows them to be able to discover those things about themselves at work. You know, do I like to work alone versus with other people? Do I enjoy to be doing things with money versus doing things with animals? What are the things that get me excited? And so a lot of our young people are just discovering those things where that might be different for older adults. And then IPS doesn't typically take into account the ideals around internship and volunteering. And so knowing how important that is for young adults, especially in terms of their discovery, we want to think about that being something that is sort of an adaptation to the traditional IPS type of work. All right, we're sliding it over to Vanessa.
All right. So most exciting part is the research, and to be honest, I've got 4 different projects listed here, and some of them, it's more than one project is captured in the information I'm going to share. And the first thing is that we worked to systematically adapt IPS for transition age youth here at Thresholds. We partnered with the UMass Research and Training Center. We have a couple of articles, and I have them at the end of this presentation if you want to look at the specifics of how we added these 2 key components, peer mentoring and supported education. We also technically had a third element, which was to focus more on this discovery and career exploration piece that we ended up not flushing out well enough, I think. And so in the future, that will be an element that will definitely be developing, and that's something I'm very passionate about understanding and developing as well. The second bullet point I have up here is there is a study of IPS, not necessarily an adaptation to IPS, but using IPS and applying it with a group of young people who are homeless. So I just want to throw out this citation as well, and I have the reference at the end. What they did find is that they were able to engage, this clinical setting was able to engage young people who were homeless, who are older adolescents and young adults, and help them get into school and into work. And so it's great to know that this is a feasible approach to work and school with even young people who do not have stable housing. The third bullet point, I wanted to let you guys know that the UMass RTC, and there's the link right there if you want to check them out. The center director there is Marianne Davis. Marsha Ellison is the leader, the primary investigator on the study. They're working with Debbie Becker and Gary Bond to adapt IPS specifically for high school students in Maryland. And so we at Thresholds have been working on adapting IPS for high school students in our Chicago public schools as well. Ishan and I are going to be working with the UMass RTC, and I'm working with them on a long-term basis to help really do this in a way that impacts young people, engages families, and really helps young people with their vocational development. And finally, IPS has been extensively studied with first episode psychosis populations, and I'm going to move to the next slide. This directly comes from a study by Rinaldi et al. It's from 2010. What I'd like to highlight here is if you look at the studies that have comparison or control groups, you can see that the rates of engagement in employment and education is much higher compared to folks who've gotten treatment as usual. So I think it's helpful to understand this. Also, what's key to get with this is that some of the first episode programs have only integrated supported employment, while others have integrated both supported employment and education. And so that's something that we've done here at Thresholds and found it to be incredibly impactful. Okay, so what is supported education and how is it different than IPS and supported employment? It isn't that different. The actual model is coming out of the University of Kansas. Both SAMHSA and the University of Kansas have supported education toolkits that are available for download immediately that show fidelity scales, just like supported employment has a very rigorous fidelity scale. If you do supported employment, you have to follow the rules and regulations on what it is. Same thing with supported education. But what we found here is that it really mirrors the same principles that are part of IPS are also part of supported education. The one key piece that I referenced earlier is that when we're working with transition-age youth, we have to think about vocational development. Starting and stopping jobs, starting and stopping education programs is the norm for all young people, not just young people with serious mental health challenges. And so the idea behind IPS is that it's as quickly as possible we're going to help someone enroll in school or get a job, or get a job. And the thing, thank you. The thing is that we really need to think more about the development, the vocational development fully, and that starting and stopping jobs in school is part of the process. Okay. And at Thresholds, we also have worked with integrating peers. And part of the theory behind this is that using peer support would be a major engagement tool for transition-age youth. And so the idea being, and what's really important about IPS and supported education here at Thresholds, is that it's optional. So the young people come to our programs and they are typically assigned housing or assigned a therapist or a case manager, but they get the choice to do supported education or supported employment. And so what's interesting is by then pairing a peer with this optional opportunity to work on one's vocational development, we thought, wow, what a great way to help young people engage in IPS and supported education. And so we currently have one peer mentor employed, and when we partnered with UMass, we had a number of peer mentors, and I have much to share about integrating young people as peer support in clinical settings and in vocational settings. Many, many challenges arise, and if I could see all of you right now, I'm sure I'd see heads nodding about just the challenges of working with young people who are in their own road to recovery with their mental health challenges. They're also, figuring out who they are vocationally. And so, how do we work and integrate young adults and just young people in general who have lived experience to be effective at engaging, sharing their stories strategically. There's lots of interesting things we've learned, and I'm excited to share them down the road. Okay, and quickly, I wanted just to cite some outcomes. The slide has a lot of text on it, but one thing I really wanted to mention was that years ago, and I've been with Thresholds for a long time, when IPS was just starting and before we'd integrated supported education and peer mentors, we were really clinically focused. And what happens is when you integrate a vocational service and you make it available to young people, what happens is your culture shifts. And so suddenly, as important as clinical outcomes, so thinking about, symptom management, vocational development becomes key. And it shifts to really look at a young person as a whole person and not just about their mental health condition. Also, this again, I have my next point, is that it's voluntary, right? And so young people have to demonstrate interest. Right now at Thresholds, we have young people who are enrolled only in supported employment, are enrolled in only supported education, and some who are enrolled in both, right? Because some are working part-time and then going to school part-time. That's the reality of young people in the regular population, or the general population. Looking over about 5 years of data here at Thresholds, on average, we have about 40% of our young people are enrolled in supported employment at any given time, and about 30% in supported education. And this is specifically of our young adult program. And then below at the bottom where you see quarterly stats, so of the young people who are enrolled in supported employment, about 30 to 40% will have started a job or maintained a job in that given quarter. And then we have some higher outcomes, or some better outcomes, you might say, for young people who are enrolled in supported education. We see young people engaging in school, taking GED courses, participating in post-secondary training, school opportunities much more frequently. And if you're looking at this pie chart and you're wondering, what's that all about? So this is from fiscal year 16, our first quarter of outcomes. And so at Thresholds, we arguably serve or work with some of the young people with the most barriers, being involved in multiple systems growing up, having delayed vocational development, having very, very serious conditions, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, and major depression. Those are our big four up here in Illinois, or at least at Thresholds. But as of last quarter, we have 85% of our young people were working in school or volunteering. 11% were not currently working or going to school, but they were open to supported employment or supported education, working with an employment or education specialist. And so this has been a big thing where we only have 4% who aren't engaging in vocational attainment, which is a big deal because vocational attainment is key for transition-age youth development. And quickly, I just wanted to mention that some of the barriers to implementing IPS and any adaptations such as peer mentoring and supported education is really engaging young people. It is a process. When young people lose a job or drop out of school or fail a class, it's challenging to re-engage young people. And so you have to take that into account when you're delivering these services and training your staff to help to really always be focusing on long-term engagement. Also, that many of young people we work with, and I know this is going on in Texas too, is that they are aging out of child systems. And suddenly at age 18 or 19 or 21, you can no longer get services. And so that's really problematic, and I actually learned from Debbie that a number of young people who are in these high level of services in Texas then can't qualify for adult services. So a lot of the research has been showing, like, we need to really figure out this stuff, this policy things to help with not only mental health service continuity, but access to supported education and supported employment. Also, funding IPS and supported education is going to look different from state to state. Creative different ways to fund whenever we go to different states. We're always asked about that. And finally, integrating peer support again, and I know we're already at 30 minutes, is a challenging thing to do depending on the number and the culture of support at your organization. And finally, and I think this is one of our last slides, is we're so excited here at Thresholds to be partnering with the University of Texas and this growing group of stakeholders who's interested in transition-age youth on their mental health and their vocational development. We're going to be working with different groups on adapting IPS that fit for your context. Here from Thresholds, we're going to be providing ongoing technical assistance. And I wonder if Debbie will jump back on at this point for more information about this partnership between Thresholds and UT Austin. I would contact Debbie. And then here's our information. So if things came up for you and you want to talk further, these are our email addresses. And also I have a slide with a bunch of resources that I hope will be made available as well after this. Back to that. Thank you, guys.
Yes, we are very excited in Texas at UT Austin and statewide of this new initiative. We've had a lot of interest statewide related to better serving or providing services for this age group. So yes, feel free to contact me. I will provide my email again. And most of you guys, I think, got this webinar from an email that was sent directly to me. So some of you guys are already participating in our future trainings, but even if you aren't doing anything formally with us, we also plan to continue to provide some other forms of education, such as this webinar, just to the general public. So even if you're not participating yet with us, you'll at least be able to get a hold of some training material. So I'm going to open up the phones right now. As a reminder to you guys, please make sure if you are watching on your computer and also have a phone on, make sure your computer is muted or we will get a lot of feedback. You can send me a question in the chat box and we'll try to answer those, or you can pipe up on the phone and ask us a question. So I'm unmuting the phone right now.
Does this sound like the thing we already did? Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
What was that?
It gets walk on.
We didn't hear a question. Were you trying to ask a question or were someone trying to mute themselves?
Debbie, if you want, I think that there was a question in the chat box if you want us to start with that.
Yeah, how about well, I have a couple ones that are farther up. I will go with that first. The first question was, can you repeat specifically what is the target age group that this is focused at?
Sure, and so our target age group at Thresholds is between 16 and 26. I think the important thing to know is that the target age group for IPS can really be anything. And so it can be defined based on whatever population you're working with. Again, it has evidence base for those that are adults. And so, you know, technically adults can be considered 18 on up. However, we know that the real sort of sweet spot around the studies have been for older adults. And so when we talk about IPS adaptations, we're really talking about that for kind of adolescents and young adults, which could really be anywhere between, you know, 14 or 15, you know, late 20s, depending on your population. And again, some pieces will work better for other areas that, for other age groups than some.
And our next question is, someone said, if a client wants to work near his home, does the job specialist do cold calls in the area for who is hiring?
Absolutely. We will actually go to that employer and try to, we will advocate for that young person and try to give that young person an interview. Our preference is to take the young person with us. One of the things Mark mentioned is that we would like the young person to do it with us so they can learn how to do these things on their own. After a while, these cold calls become partners to the point where these employers begin to call us when they have open positions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea behind it is that, we will do cold calls, we'll do internet searches, we'll, talk with others in the area. We'll show up sometimes and even observe if it's a restaurant. Let's say we'll go over there and grab a bite to eat and see what it's like for the job to help a young person get oriented to it. But the idea is that we really want to help the young person take those leads. So instead of us doing all those calls, we may talk with the young person and coach them through what would an initial call sound like, how might you go about doing it, those sorts of things.
Next question. Was someone trying to ask a question on the phone? Okay, I'm going to go with Warren's question next. Would you recommend separate supported education and supported employment specialists, or would it be advised that the same individual provide both services? And I know Vanessa has comments on this one.
I do. I do. This is a debate because here we had to separate the position. But here's the issue. So in a lot of the research out there, it's assumed, especially in the first episode psychosis programs where you see supported ed and supported employment integrated, it is the same person primarily providing the services. And I've had a discussion with Gary Bond about this, and he thinks that Thresholds has a very unique population, that our young people are struggling a lot, and that they need a lot of support. And that's part of the reason why we needed a separate supported employment specialist and a separate supported education. The thing is, we had a history of doing IPS and doing it well, right? And then we introduced supported education and didn't necessarily have some of the outcomes developed and weren't necessarily holding staff as accountable. Education looks a little different than employment too, figuring out what does it mean to be successful. Is it one course completion? Is it 4 courses completion? Is it graduation? So it's a little bit more challenging other than just tracking job starts and maintaining a job. And so, but here's the thing, I think it could be integrated. I think that the same tenets or the same approach to doing job development you're doing with school development, right? And you're developing relationships with universities and community colleges, their offices of disabilities, their counseling centers, and you're also going out there and you're talking to, in Chicago, it's a big city, we're talking to all the different training opportunities that are out there, different certifications that you can get. And so building up that knowledge took us some time here. And I think if we would have had a little bit more of a history of really focusing on higher ed, we just hadn't. At this point, I feel like the same people, due to our resource list and the partnerships we've developed, we could potentially have the same people delivering it. However, if you're new to both of these things and you're going to start developing these relationships off the ground, I think it's worth talking about having separate folks. And then also funding them could also be an additional challenge. Okay.
So the next question is actually about funding, and I think I have Molly Lopez also on our team on the call, and she can jump in to help me with this. So this is definitely an evolving thing that we are exploring, and will be a part of our exploration process as we start piloting transition aid support employment and education. Right now we have been looking at how it can be funded through the YES waiver. We've been exploring how it can be funded through Medicaid rehab, looking at skills training, other things like that. We also have been in consultation with different systems, such as DARS, looking at vocational rehab, looking at some of the transition programs that are available through child welfare and juvenile justice. We are developing a document right now internally that we will hopefully be sharing sometime this spring that will provide some sort of technical assistance related to how you could fund different youth and young adults depending upon what systems they're involved in. So if you have a youth who's involved in just mental health, it might look different than if the youth is also involved in child welfare. The other thing that we have been discussing a lot, as Vanessa had indicated, is we've discovered that there is a lot of youth who might be enrolled in the YES waiver at a very high level of care on the child end, but then are not eligible for the adult end. We are definitely continuing to have these sort of conversations. We recently actually had a conversation with Bluebonnet about how they're exploring how to provide services, so of looking outside of traditional mental health. So it's evolving. We're learning there alongside with you guys. I don't know if Molly has other thoughts on this.
I would just add, I think that was a great answer. We don't have all the answers right now. What we do have is some of our state agencies who are the funders for these various avenues that Debbie mentioned at the table to have this discussion with you and with us as we explore, as you guys explore piloting this and where the struggles are. We want to be sharing that information with our state partners, and I know they want to be helping you guys figure this out too, because they're very committed to helping this work.
I'm going to go on to the next question. Would you please discuss how supported education and supported employment work with individuals who are currently expecting or have small children of their own?
Yes. So yes, that does, that creates its own set of challenges. So they do work with the parenting and pregnant teams the same way as a youth who are not pregnant or a parent. However, we do have to look at child care. We have to look at, as they become in their third trimester, what that will look like. We still continue to job develop. We're just honest with the employer up front and let them know that they are expecting a child, and it's their choice if they choose to hire that person. So it's still the same services, but we emphasize the child care more with them than we do with the other populations.
And the next question we've kind of already answered, but I'll go back to it just for a moment. If the client is doing both supported employment and supported education, do you feel that it's easier to have the same person that they work with, or to have someone to provide them help with education and someone to provide them help with employment?
So one thing, so we have tried it where the staff was doing everything. They were both doing employment and education. One of the things we found out that it was extremely confusing to the staff. They had a difficult time with balancing the two, and oftentimes they didn't know if they should be, focusing on education or focus on employment. So, which is the reason why we thought it was important to split the two jobs. What we do now is that the entire team comes together. So right now we have 5 employment specialists, and we have an education specialist on top of our peer specialists that comes together. They meet regularly. That way they're constantly communicating with one another and providing those services to those youth.
And, the other thing I'll add is that a lot of it really has to do with capacity,
Right.
So and Vanessa sort of alluded to this too, that, there's pros and cons on both sides. On one end, you would think that there could be stronger integration if the same person is providing employment as education, because then they're involved in both of those worlds. And that's definitely something that could be the case. What we've also found is that there's higher levels of specificity when you have separate people doing that, as long as you're able to integrate that well, both within the clinical team as well as with the vocational team. So in some respects, it's sort of a luxury to be able to have somebody that can do both of those things. And, we always try to emphasize if you're able to do that, that's great. But we know that the majority of organizations aren't necessarily able to do that. So when we provide training or technical assistance, we really think about it in either of those roles. And I think that there could be benefits to either end of those things.
Yeah. Yes. I agree.
The next question is, can you speak to how you've worked with youth who are involved in the juvenile justice system, and how that might be different than working with youth who have a history of being involved in just child welfare or mental health? Talking about working with the different systems.
Yeah, and I'll let Ishan answer that question. We integrate into all of our programs. We have a number of young people that are specifically funded through juvenile justice, and then we have others that are funded through other arenas, but have been in and out of jail from time to time, and as a result have a record that as a result would affect their employment.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they're on probation.
Right. So with the youth that are involved in the justice system, what we do is that we emphasize the importance of disclosing the information to the employer, being honest with the employer up front. We do a lot of role playing and teaching them how to respond to that question. So, for example, we would say, I've made some bad choices that had led me, involved in the justice system. But since then, this is what I have done over the last 10 years, over the last 3 years to make me a better person. So we do a lot of role playing, and also we make sure we look for employers where a background check is not they don't do a background check. Mm-hmm. So we put a lot of emphasis on that. And you'll be surprised the number of employers that are not, where they don't look at the background check.
Or the ones that do background checks and purposely are sympathetic to young people or other people that have had some justice backgrounds. So.
And actually, this wasn't a question, but I was just wondering if you could share with the group about some of the community building you guys have done related to improving relationships between some of those youth and Chicago police and other things that you've talked to me about that you guys have been working on.
So one of the things with our students in the with the Chicago Public Schools is that we have held kickoff at the police stations, because I know that now nationally there's a lot of tension between the youth and our youth and the police department. So we wanted to make sure that they come together so they can see them as partners and the ones that want to help them. So we bring the services to the police department, and you'll be surprised the number of youth that actually came to the and showed up and engaged in those activities with the police officers.
Yeah, and it's more important now than it ever has been, in terms of really understanding the relationships between police that we rely upon for a number of different things, and the young people rely upon themselves. Yet at the same time, our young people are also both fearful and feel like they're targeted quite a bit. And everybody knows about a lot of the things that have been going on in Chicago, so it's even more sensitive for us now and important for us to kind of increase that integration.
As a follow-up related to some of your juvenile justice questions, that if you take a client in from the juvenile justice system on a cold call to find employment, how do you introduce yourself? So if the person works for juvenile probation, and if they're just wondering of how you introduce yourself and refer to what your role is compared to the youth.
Okay, so we provide a lot of training in this area, and we call it 3 cups of tea. So the first time we visit an employer, whether this is a cold call or not, we're in and out within 2 minutes. And all we're saying is, hi, my name is Ishan Spencer, and I'm an employment specialist with Thresholds. And I work with youth who have challenges, and they have identified this place as a place that they want to work with. Is it possible, can you meet with me for 10 minutes sometime next week so I can learn more about your company and how I can best help you with staffing with your company? That's all we do with the first meeting. Then the second meeting, we go in, we spend no more than 20 minutes, and we really focus on those things that are not obvious, that you don't see on the website. We talk about, those positions that you don't hear about, or you have a hard time staffing. We talk about, what do you expect out of a candidate? What are some of the things that you have learned? So we really focus on those areas. And then by the third visit is when we bring in that young person back in to actually meet that particular employer. And this can go on for months. Sometimes the employer buys in right away. Within the first visit, they love the idea. We're doing their job for them. It's easy. They want us to bring a young person in. Sometimes, depending on the employer and stigma and lack of education, it may take months before we get an employer to come in and buy into the idea of working with our youth.
Do you directly ask them about criminal if you do a criminal record check during that meeting or one of those initial meetings?
So the way we phrase it is, so no, we don't do it directly. The way we phrase it is that, are there anything that immediately would get someone terminated or you would not hire someone for? So that's how we ask that question. And they typically would bring that up and say someone with a felony or someone who has poor social skills, or if they don't have a degree, then that's when we'll get all of those answers.
And our next question is actually directly to me. It's asking when this program will be piloted in Texas. So we are about to do a training with our lovely team here in January, and we have 4 sites, primarily local mental health authorities, and then there's a couple of private providers that will be participating in training, and then we will be gathering data. So hopefully we can show different individuals around the state the strength to rolling out a program like this on a larger scale across the state. We're obviously aware that there are some billing and budget issues that will be barriers, so we're thinking that going at it from a pilot perspective will give us more information so we can provide better technical assistance and information so that future agencies will be more prepared for how to be reimbursed for this service. And another question is saying, get in your last couple of questions, because I'm sure that our team over here probably has many more things that they have to venture to finish today. Oh, the person said if they personally work for probation and they give their card, wouldn't it just automatically give away that the person they're working with has a criminal record?
I thought that was mental health.
I think
Yes,
they're,
it does. So, yes, you're absolutely right. So one of the things that we spend a great deal talking about disclosure, and spending time with explaining to our youth, what does that mean? What are you allowing us to do? What are you going to say to the employer or the potential employer? So initially when we go in, we say challenges. We don't give up a lot of information. It's only when we have to. So, for example, there was a situation where some youth, there were social issues where we literally had to sit down with the employer and explain her diagnosis and how this interferes with her being able to keep the job. So our business cards does say mental health on that, so we do have to disclose that. And yes, you have those employers that say, no, those people are crazy. Absolutely. I mean, we have had that. I never want to work with them. This is where we take the opportunity to educate the employers. We tell them that, 1 in 5 people have a mental illness, 1 in 17 have a severe mental illness. And we talk about all of those people that are working, people who have worked for 20 years despite their disability. And that's why it's so great to have the young person with them so they can see that what they think of that person is not what this person is presenting. They can see that this person can function and can do the job with no problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 other pieces that I would add to really along those lines, and one of which is that, if you're working in the probation sector and you have a card that says that, then clearly they are going to know, and I think that should be to some extent a sense of pride and help build the employers. I think what you want to do is be able to build your street cred around that. Yes, I'm from probation, and as a result, you're going to be getting young people that are working for you, or young adults, or whatever that might be, that are working for you that have somebody that you can contact if things don't go well, or if you need to adjust there, or that you're going to be able to partner with. Whereas if you're hiring somebody off the streets, you may not be able to get that. And so if you're able to build your credibility as being a supporter for the employer, then they're going to want to come to you for their next employee and stuff like that. For instance, we have one grocery store where we've had a number of young people go through there. Some of them haven't worked out all that well. But because we've had so many that have, they continue to work with us in that capacity. And then I think the other thing to keep in mind is that as much as you can, depending on the young person, you want them to take the lead.
Right.
Sometimes you may not, as the worker or as the supervisor or whatever, even be a face with the employer at all. Meaning that you may be in the background helping to coach the young person along, but they may be the one making the contact and doing the initial application and the interview and all that without an employer even knowing that you're involved. So that's another element of supported employment, but it depends on the young person, what they need and what they're comfortable with.
and this will be well, I guess there's 2 questions, but this will be our final question. So first one I can answer easily. It says, do you work with the families of youth? And this is a definitely yes. And we will continue to always have conversations with you guys about how to better engage the family, and that should be the goal in any services you provide. I don't know if Vanessa was about to say something.
No, that's good. You did. Excellent.
And the final question, if you guys have any other questions, just email them to me and I can connect. I can either answer them or I can connect with Thresholds. How long do you follow the youth or young adult once they have obtained employment?
As long as they need the services.
Yep.
So if they're working with an employer for 2 years, we're there. See, what you have to understand is that new supervisors come in and their expectation is different. So that could be an adjustment for their youth. Or maybe the young person lost their mother and, they have increased symptoms. So we have to come in and provide, extra support to them. So typically we work with them for a year. But if for some reason they need additional support or they need to come back, we will work with them and provide them ongoing retention services.
Well, thank you so much for our presenters today. Just as a reminder that we recorded this, and we will be posting it to the Texas Systems of Care website, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to provide you more similar information. And I will send out my email again to the list of the people who got the invitation to participate in this webinar, and I will also share the PowerPoint from this, and also someone had asked for the supported education website information, so I will send that out afterwards. Thank you so much for all your time today. Have a great